Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can even get yourself a nice 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, I'm going to be discussing Snorlax VMAX in a bit more detail. Now, initially, I just wanted to do a simple deck analysis over a Snorlax build, but I really had my head scratching over what was the best way to play it. And the card is just so versatile, being a colorless guy. There's all these different options that were whirling around my head, so I thought it would be easier for me to discuss all those options, the strengths and weaknesses of all of them, and go over Snorlax in a bit more detail. So I'll start off with a quick breakdown of the card. We'll look at some strengths, some weaknesses, then we'll jump into the best engines out there, and then I'll give you a couple sample lists to end on. So jumping straight into that card breakdown, 220 hit points on the basic V. It's pretty chunky. Both of these Pokemon also have a 4 retreat cost, so buff padding is available here, which is obviously very good for increasing our hit points even further. Swallow Up does 60 for 3, and you heal the same amount you dealt, which is okay, not ideal, but it's some early pressure that can maybe knock out some evolving basics. And then you have Falling Down for 4 colorless, does 170 and send yourself to sleep. You can normally mitigate the sleep just by like VMAXing the following turn or finding switch outs, but regardless, you will rarely ever be using Falling Down because you're hoping to get into the VMAX here, where we gain an extra 120 hit points, which is stunning. We get all the way up to 340, which is really huge, and we gain this G-Max Fall attack. The main focus of basically all these Snorlax decks will be this attack, where you do 60 base and 30 more for each of your benched Pokemon. Think of it as a buffed up Riotous Beating in many ways, which, as we know, was the focus of a lot of good decks, but mainly because of Zoroark's crazy good ability, which Snorlax unfortunately doesn't have. But G-Max Fall does a lot more damage. You can cap out at 5 basics on your bench, and then you're doing 210 with that 60 base, which is obviously pretty decent. And yeah, that's what we're going to try and build around with Snorlax overall. Let's have a look at the strengths first of all. And it really is the selling point of hit points, really. 340 is monstrous, and you can go up to 390 with buff padding. That's a lot of meat to get through, especially when we have things like Hyper Potion and Malamar available for healing this guy. Pushing people into 3-hit KOs is obviously very good news for you. Snorlax is also colorless, of course, so we can use all sorts of different types of energy acceleration. There's Welder available, there's Malamar, there's just 3C in general and trying to hit those. There's Porygon, there's all sorts of different builds that you can try and use to accelerate, even things like Rillaboom, which I won't be discussing today because it's a stage 2 and worse than other options. But so many forms of acceleration are open to Snorlax that you really can go pretty creative with the build, I would say. And speaking of creativity, Snorlax is just literally welcoming you to flood your board with all sorts of nonsense, be it draw support, be it damage modifiers, be it all this other stuff, better like gusting options. It's just yearning for you to put stuff into play because you need that in play just to help the raw damage output of Snorlax alone. So it really does mean that you need to try and get a full board of Pokemon to really get Snorlax rolling, which means you're always going to have a lot of different partners. Snorlax is never going to be on his own. Onto the weaknesses, this damage output is quite reliant on a number of bench Pokemon, so you need to have a pretty strong turn 1 and 2 of draw power and Pokemon search to actually be doing threatening damage. That 210 doesn't always come off on turn 2 because you need to have filled your board completely, and that's not always easy, especially when some of these builds are reliant on some pretty low impact supporters in terms of drawing options. I'm talking about the Welder ones here, where you only get to draw 3. Yes, you get crazy good acceleration, but if you're accelerating just to end up doing like, 90 or 120 or so damage, it's not actually that impressive. It's way more impressive if you fill up your board and then end on high damage output at the end. So yeah, this damage output is reliant on getting not only your Snorlax set up, which is already a stage 1, but also getting as many basics down as possible, and hopefully these are basics that help out your more long-term strategy with other things later on. That maximum damage output of 210 is still a little bit awkward. You're out of range of a couple of new V Pokemon, most notably the Zacian V, which seems to be very powerful, and you're miles away from Tag Team GX Pokemon hit points, so it looks like you may want to have some damage modifiers in here to make that a little bit more favorable. I think especially the Zacian, where you're just 10 hit points out of reach, right? So having some damage modifiers could be pretty tempting here. I think the other issues here is that the regular Snorlax V doesn't really have great attacks, so we are quite slow on the tempo front. Even if you are, once again, a Welder-based deck, you can get like 60 for 3 on turn 1, but that's not all that impressive, really. It can set up some tag team math if they're two 70-hit-point tag teams, so nothing to like scoff at or anything, but it's not really ideal for tempo, and also you don't want to be risking your Snorlax in the active if you're up against some tag teams, because sometimes they can reach 220 back to you, and then you're going to have to rebuild a Snorlax, which is sometimes a little bit too awkward for you. So I don't like the fact that it's fairly slow. You oftentimes spend turns like passing, well, turn 1 passing into people almost every time, even when you're going second, so that's not ideal. And also it's stage 1 based, so again it adds to that sort of slow tempo side of things, but also it eats up deck spaces, and at the same time it makes you find even more things. Snorlax really does rely on you having a lot of setup all the time. You need to have a bunch of basics, and you need to find your Snorlax. Sometimes you even need to find things like triple acceleration to get rolling, or Welder combinations, and all these things are kind of awkward at times. So that leads us to the question of, what do we pair with this guy? There's a lot of options on screen, and I'm going to be discussing most of these that you can see here today. So yeah, Snorlax really can be paired with a lot. In Japan, I've seen a lot of different builds, so I've tried to come up with some of my own, but also look at some of theirs for some inspiration in certain moments. So we'll start off with the Welder route. I think this is the one that's most obvious to people, because you have access to a lot of good stage 1s with the Fire package, and we've seen things like Abilities artwork in the past, and you're basically now like the new tank that you can use that has decent damage output. Having this Welder option available does give you access to Ninetales, and Ninetales is the best gust in the game, especially when we are moving over to a mixture of GX and V Pokemon. Great Catcher does get a little bit weaker. Custom Catcher, not always ideal. Ninetales is the thing that can get you pretty much everything, which is great. You also have access to damage modifiers in Volcarona GX, kind of a forgotten card, but we have better ball search now, and having this as just a bench-sitting tech can sometimes be great news for you, especially because like one ping here or there is enough for Zacians. Also, you gain that fire type coverage by actually having Volcarona as an attacker in that sort of matchup, which could be interesting. Also, the massive Heatwave GX is really annoying for ADP builds, by the way. So those sorts of things are available with the Volcarona, which is cool. You have access to good draw power. Cincino and also Salazzle both synergize well with just discarding fire energies, and you can fire crystal them back. Cincino is like a more general draw engine, but I thought it was worth noting that we have Salazzle in addition to this as an option that could potentially be stronger than Cincino if you play enough fire energies. Also, we have some decent Hyper Potion synergy. It's good to have Hyper Potion synergy in addition to Malolana, just 'cause it gives you more outs for healing, and it means that you're not just having to hit a Malolana on a specific turn and then get back into the active, because that can be disrupted in all sorts of different ways. So having Hyper Potion as an option is always great. The mini synergy we have here is that we can just Welder back onto our guy when we've removed those 2 energies from Hyper Potion, which is always pretty decent. And with the Welder build, you do have some early tempo options out there. You can try and use Heatran turn 1 to Steaming Stomp things instead. Also, you have a good type coverage. Heatran, of course, can get through Zacian, same as Volcarona. So just having some red attackers in your deck can help out against specifically Zacian, which is going to be a popular archetype, which is something to bear in mind. And just in general, having Heatran available is also just insane, because Snorlax basically never dies. He sits there with 3 energy on himself, and then you can Welder attach and bring your Heatran into the active, and suddenly Hotburn can do a big 300 swing. So that sort of 2-shot range that Snorlax has, you can sometimes twist the tempo up on the opponent and finish off games a lot more quickly than they might expect, thanks to a hot burn out of nowhere. So that's something to bear in mind. Heatran's a phenomenal card, and when you have a big sponge taking up energies, Heatran gets even better, which is something to bear in mind. A few weaknesses of this build is that your draw supporters, especially if you are super Welder focused, aren't great, right? You're probably just playing 4 Welder, then a lower count of other supporters out there, and you're really hoping that things like the Dene GX and other ball search options get you enough basics down turn 1, get you that Snorlax, and get you into a decent hand to maybe try and hit that Welder on turn 2. I think also I've said that the fire stuff has all this capability, but it can't really fit all of it at once. You might have to cherry pick between like good draw engine plus Ninetales, or good draw engine plus Volcarona, or Volcarona plus Ninetales, and then just have like a mediocre draw engine like Jirachi. So you can't just jam it all in one deck. It's not an all singing, all dancing list because it's just not spacious enough for all of those things. And also, I think in general, you commit a lot of deck space just to energy cards. Energy cards are, obviously pretty poor. That eats into then like your ball search count, your support account, the amount of healing tools you can have in your list. All of that stuff just gets sucked up by raw energy cards just to make your Welder more live and just so you can use some of these cool abilities. So that's also a mini issue with the Welder-based route. But I think this will probably still end up being one of the more common ways to build Snorlax. Just something to bear in mind. There are a few other lists on here that have a bit of a Welder engine, but this is the one where I'm talking about, like full-on Welder, just fire energies, nothing else supporting it in the back. Porygon-Z is another interesting one. You will naturally be playing some triple accelerations in addition to recycle energies and sometimes even a couple of draw energies on top just to fill out your curve. I think something like a 9 or 10 energy count in total sounds pretty good to me. I like that the Porygon-Z build, even if you miss your stage 2, you can still just be attacking with Snorlax just by having a bunch of Porygons on the bench, and you can just hit your triple accelerations early, which can be pretty decent. I like that you have a conventional supporter line, so you can use Professor's Research on turn 1 and try and access a bunch of cards to actually get a bunch of basics down, which is always good. You have amazing Hyper Potion synergy. This is the best Hyper Potion synergy of all the lots here. I think it's actually worth playing basically 1 Malolana and then just 4 Hyper Pots, because the idea is here that you use Recycle Energies, then Hyper Potion, then reattach the Recycle Energies instantly thanks to Crazy Code. So definitely the best Hyper Potion synergy that we have available, I think, on all the slides here. I like having Jirachi because you then have some good Malolana synergy. You have some good, like in-between turns, switching in and out, which is pretty good. And again, in combination with that conventional supporter line, Stellar Wish helps you dig that little bit deeper to find more ball search, or just get you that first turn supporter as well. So you have a pretty stable engine despite being a stage 2, which is interesting. But yeah, you are stage 2 reliant eventually. I think you can only rely on hitting so many triple accelerations before the Porygon-Z needs to take over at some point. This list doesn't have space for damage modifiers, and there aren't really any that you could look for. I also think it's a little bit awkward to find those special energy. I don't feel like you want to play too many Guzma here, because you want to be trying to draw cards towards the Porygon in the first place. So you just physically have to like draw into those 3 CEs and stuff in the early turns and hope to draw into the Porygon combos, which is also a little bit awkward. And just because you're committing so much space to candies and stage 2s, you really have limited space for Gust. I think you could fit like 2 great catches and not much else. So you can fall prey to like Dole-based decks and some V-based lists, which can also be a little bit awkward. But I do really think the biggest selling point of this Porygon-Z list is that you really capitalize on the Hyper Potion. It becomes an excellent card in this deck list, and that's something that you should be considering. Malamar's another interesting one. You do gain Psychic type coverage. I mentioned how Fire is a good type to have right now just for Zacian, but also Psychic is a good type coverage to have because I believe Zacian and Mewtwo are probably going to be the 2 best decks in the format. I'm just looking on the surface, so having some Psychic weakness on your side is never a bad thing. You have Indeedee as a healer, but also as an attacking presence against Mewtwo. Even Dawnwing's Necrozma can come in for a Moon's Eclipse, which could be devastating against them. So that's pretty cool. You get to play a conventional supporter line, which is also great. You, again, have decent Hyper Potion synergy here, because you could try and do a Dawnwings to Invasion into the active. You can Hyper Potion and then Psychic Recharge those energies straight back onto the Snorlax and then retreat out of your Dawnwings Necrozma. So that is good. It means that you don't need to play physical Malolanas. You can just have the Dawnwings Balloon package with Hyper Pots, which is pretty cool. And another thing about the Psychic stuff, when we're talking about Snorlax trying to reach its maximum potential, you have Mysterious Treasure available. So you have great options to find early Inkays, early Indeedees, early Dawnwings, all that sort of stuff, to actually fill your board quickly for a turn 2 attack, which is something to bear in mind. I think the few weaknesses of Malamar is that you don't really have any onboard draw. You're completely reliant on your supporters, possibly a thin Jirachi package. But yeah, overall, you're really reliant on just your physical draw supporters. You have no real damage modifier. Yes, you could probably play like 1 or 2 Giratinnas for Distortion Door. If you can hit some Zacians on the bench, that could be reasonable. Usually, Zacians do chill on the bench at some points in games just because they want to be using Metal Saucer. Oftentimes, they have ADP as well, and that's going to be in the active for 1 GX attack, so trying to use Distortion Door while they are still chilling on the bench can be viable, but it's not ideal, and, you know, it's not going to help out against any tag team matchup or anything like that. It's just sort of wasted damage at times, so it's not perfect. Also, it's going to eat up a bench space, which isn't an Inkay and stuff like that, which can also be awkward. And although we do have the good ball search available, we still need to find multiple stage 1s. We still need to find our Mallies, usually like 2 Mallies, or at least 1 Mallie turn 2. And we also need to find our Snorlax, and that's a lot of pieces to get, especially when you don't have Pokemon draw power. We know how awkward just playing regular Mallie is, how hard it is just to get a Shadow Impact off. Now we're adding an extra step to the process, which is finding another evolution in the Snorlax, and that's also when we're committing deck spaces to cards that aren't consistency pieces, like these new Hyper Potions. So that's something that I do believe is awkward, and I think this list will fall prey to some hand-locking cards out there, like Marnie in general in most decks, but also the Mewtwo list that has hand-lock available. This feels pretty ugly, even though we have some potential decent type coverage. They could just put us to a low hand early, and then we could be in a bit of trouble. Intelleon Greninja's a bit more out there, I'm going to be honest with this one, but it's something that I thought was potentially worth discussing. I'm wanting to put a number of stage 2s in the list because the Intelleon and Greninja are both stage 2s, but neither of them require rare candy, so you can just have a physical high Pokemon count here and go through the stage 1s and then into the stage 2s. The idea here being is that Frogadier and Greninja GX can provide great damage modification. They're good against Zacian and also the tag team stuff, which is really awesome for you. You gain water type coverage, which is actually okay when there are still going to be Welder based decks out there. You also gain good sniping potential with Shadowy Hunter GX, so that can be a nice alternate option if you only have space for 1 or 2 like great catchers or something, or like 1 great catcher even, because you're playing so many stage 2s. You can at least have Shadowy Hunter GX available to you, which is something interesting. And you also get to play more conventional supporters, which is also pretty good. Potentially you'll make room for a couple Guzma Hala in here, because not only am I wanting to play triple acceleration, but you can see a super boost on the screen. Now, this is the big believer play list, where you try and get as many Intelleon and Greninja into play as possible, and then once you've started to run out of triple accelerations, you can then try and use Greninja GX to Haze Slash and to Shadowy Hunter and stuff to try and close out games, especially if you are up against like single prize based decks and stuff like that. It's how we've seen things like Nidoqueen work on only 5 energies, because Greninja can recycle himself, so that's something to bear in mind. Issues are obvious here. You are multiple stage 2 reliant. You don't have true draw power, you just have tutoring effects from the Drizzile and the Intelleon, so that can be a little bit awkward when we're trying to find multiple pieces all at once. And there's not much room for gusting at all because we have to play so many Pokemon. I squeezed in 1 great catcher and I found it really difficult. So this is going to be one that I'm going to try on stream for sure. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, but it's definitely the more dreamer build of Snorlax out of the lot. Roxie Boxy is an interesting one as well. I think you can see how much I'm yearning for damage modifiers. I think it's a really big deal here, and the Roxie list has obviously great damage modification available to it. Just playing Roxie in general encourages you to play tech Pokemon, because all of these Pokemon can then just be chucked away at the drop of a hat to draw us some cards, similar to how we've seen Persian Box function. You play some random tech Pokemon that are helpful in certain matchups, and then you toss them away with Roxie when need be. Roxie is a good dig as well. It's a 6-card dig when you're discarding Pokemon, so it really helps you access a lot of cards. I think it works well with Mincino as well, because Mincino is already digging deep into the deck, and it actually makes Roxie more live in general, so you really get a deep dig through the deck, which is pretty sweet. It's a very nice modifier. It's not just targeting down one target, you're blow away bombing their entire board that's in play, and that can set up a lot of nice math for you. You also have then the option of soft locking with Shadowbox Mimikyu. You can shut down like Mewtwo. You can shut down some ability-based draw power with type Null. You can shut down All sorts of different Pokemon out there as well. So, sorry, not Type Null, what's it called? Silvally. A few different Pokemon out there you can try and Shadow Box to shut off, mainly for Mewtwo, because you still find it a little bit difficult to knock those out too easily, even with this Roxie package. So trying to make life difficult for them could be pretty interesting. And I think the best thing about this Roxie build is that you gain access to Yveltal GX's Doom Count. We've seen how Sablegoons has wanted to have Doom Count as a big selling point, and by having Roxie and a couple Galarian Zigzagoon in here, you can try and make the most out of a single Dark Energy attachment Doom Count GX to either close games in a similar way to how I was talking about the Heatran being a good closer for you, or just being a card where you're missing 3 CE for a turn. Why not just Doom Count instead and take a bunch of prizes that way? So I think Yveltal GX attack is really busted right now as hit points get bigger. Its effect gets stronger, and with Roxie, it feels relatively easy to abuse this. I think the weaknesses of this sort of build, you don't have Hyper Potion synergy, and also when you're using Roxie, you're not using Malamar, obviously, so you're less tanky than all these other builds. You're much more aggressive in that regard, so it's kind of a different mentality around the Snorlax. You're just hoping that like buff paddings and stuff keep you healthy, whereas you're just trying to target the opponent's Pokemon much more aggressively. You're also quite 3-city reliant, and although you do have Roxie and Minccino available, there'll be times where you miss and you feel very, very sad when those situations do occur. And at the same time, you're committing 4 spaces to Roxie and 4 spaces to Weezing and like Lurballs and stuff like that, and you don't really have that many good conventional draw supporters for that first turn if you are the one going second, of course. Less impactful if you're the one going first or whatever. But it's definitely something that you might be a little bit concerned about, because there will be those situations where you're having to Roxie away Pokemon that you would rather put into play for Snorlax in general. So there's that small anti-synergy there where Roxie is throwing away Pokemon, and really you want Pokemon in your hand to start putting into play for Snorlax to attack with. So there is a small anti-synergy there, which is worth noting. Magcargo Oranguru is another one. I think this is quite a nice just engine in general. This doesn't really have all the glitz and glam. You don't have damage modifiers. Your draw power isn't all that strong. You're just trying to tutor, again, key pieces here. And you don't have space for a lot of the gusting. I really, really tried to make Oranguru Magcargo also be able to fit Ninetales, but I just couldn't do it in the end. The big payoffs of Magcargo Guru is that you don't miss. You just smooth over and then use the Oranguru to get 3 CEs when you need to. You have the option for a mini Welder package to supplement these 3 CEs, and then you also gain access to Heatran. I've also been able to play Jirachis in here, so you have good synergy with Malamar to keep you getting extra Stellar Wish value for future turns, and Jirachi just being a good opening Pokemon in general and getting you rolling on those opening turns even without supporters, which is great. And you get to continue to play a pretty strong support account in general, and the Welder isn't really the main focus. It can just chip in when you're lacking triple acceleration. So I think this is going to be the most consistent build of Snorlax, but it's consistently okay. It's never like completely barnstorming people with these damage buffs that you can have. You don't have Ninetales for really good control over the opponent's stuff. You're just getting your plan A going as much as possible with this build. I think that's appealing for me because I'm just hoping that 390 hit points is enough to win me games, and here and there I can get burst damage with Heatran and such. Whereas some of these are more sort of believer lists where you're looking to do all this convoluted stuff and sort of patch up the holes that Snorlax has. This list is sort of embracing the good stuff of Snorlax and just making that happen as much as possible. So certainly one that I think is one I also want to try. And I believe this could be the most consistent build of the ones I've shown so far. So let's look at a couple sample lists now. I think I've got 3 here. We'll start off with the Ninetales build. This is, like I was saying, a basically full-on Welder build. I have 4 Welder, and then I also have 2 Marnie as backup supporters. I also have 2 copies of Triple Acceleration and Energy in here as well. It can give you some leeway when you're wanting to use other supporter cards. And it just means that you're not forced to Welder for full value. And I'm only paying 10 Fire Energy, so there are plenty of situations where you just Welder for the draw power. And get some extra acceleration on top, but 3 CE can come in clutch as well. So it's like you're playing 6 Welders almost in terms of getting attachments onto that Snorlax. You can see I've maxed out the copies of Snorlax V. I really want to have him on board early. And I have a Ditto Prism plus 4 Mincino, and then I have a 1 Vulpix and 2 Ninetales in there as well. So Tails providing incredible Gust is just such a selling point. You can't undersell how good that is for just grinching Pokemon early, like setup Pokemon for people, or just being able to close out games on Dedenne, even if you are being hit with like reset stamps to low hand sizes. Here we have Cincino and we have Tails. We basically always close game when we need to. Cincino is just a great card to draw us cards in general. It's kind of making up for the lack of physical draw supporters that we have, making the Welder, in theory, a little bit better. You'll see in DDV in a lot of my Snorlax list, I think it's really important, because specifically against ADPization, you have 340, you Malolana, which is 460, and that's the amount that they can churn out over a couple turns with the Zacian. Oh, that's not even the Zacian ADP, that's just like regular Zacian doing 230 over 2 turns. So the Malolana is useless until you get that Indeedee heal on top, or if you have that buff padding. So I like having Indeedee and buff padding in the list. Both of these protect you against Zacian specifically, to keep out of range of their attacks, basically, which is really important. You've got that Heatran in there as well for potential early pressure or just a late game sweeper. I think with only 10 fire energy, he's much more late game sweepy than he is just a turn 1 play, unless he just happens to be on the field. And 1 copy of the Dedenne GX, I don't like using him, but we don't have that many good conventional draw supporters, so sometimes you just got to dig with this guy and try and find more basics. The trainer count is a little bit minimalistic. A couple Fire Crystal just to give yourself better access to Ninetales, and sometimes it's just adding cards into your hand physically for more Cincino action to draw us deeper into the deck. A couple Hyper Potions, I've said how it can work nicely if you have Welder in hand at the same time. Again, a card that works well with Fire Crystal in hand. Then we have a lot of Ball Search, a couple Incense, 3 Calm, 4 Quick Ball, should get us a bunch of Pokemon rolling. We got 1 Buff Padding and 1 U-Turn board. U-turn board's pretty nice on any of our stage 1s because they all have 1 retreat cost and they don't get disrupted by Absol. 2 Marnie, 2 Malolana, 4 Welder, and then we have the 1 Heat Factory, which just gets better because we can't use supporters on turn 1, so it's a draw 3 on turn 1 no matter what, basically. And then a couple Giant Halves to dig out some of these fires for more synergy alongside our Welder. So, yeah, I think I've seen a lot of people go down this sort of route with Mincino and Tails being the front runners. I know a lot of Japanese lists have been around this sort of concept as well. I think it's pretty reasonable for sure, and is probably going to be one of the front runner builds of Snorlax. Here's my personal favorite, I think, the Magcargo based build. I just think that Magcargo Guru combo is very, very solid. One interesting thing here is I'm playing Jirachi and Zacian V, and I'm playing no Dedenne GX because I don't want to feed my opponent those easy prizes when I don't have the power spikes on my side. I don't have the powerful Ninetales. I don't have damage modifiers, so I'm trying to be tried and trusted and make them go through the big Snorlax, make it hard for them. Don't give those people the easy Gust options to just close games against you and ignore Snorlax. Make them go through the active. So that's why I'm playing Zacian for potentially just like a turn 1 pass play where you just draw 3 more off of Intrepid Sword. And again, he's just an option that you can have for stamp proofing and such for late game. Although Magcargo Guru pretty much stamp proofs you anyways a lot of the time. So yeah, I like Zacian as just an early option. He's like a bad Dedenne basically. But way tankier, and we don't want to feed our opponent too many easy prizes when we're a list like this, which is just very fair. You're just trying to do what Snorlax does and hope that that's enough. But I feel like if people are grinching Dedennes, it's not going to be enough a lot of the time. For the Pokemon, I've got a Fishing Rod in there just because I've got a couple like cheeky 2 counts, like the Oranguru and the Magcargo, which are actually pretty important. So getting those back is going to be important. Just got the 1 Fire Crystal in addition to that rod. Should give us plenty of access to fires. It gives us some good synergy with things like Heat Factory. We like having fires, well, enough fires accessible for that Heatran GX to actually pop off, which is nice. We've got 2 Switch, 2 Great Catcher, 3 Calm, and 4 Quick Ball. Got that 1 Buff Padding. I always play Buff Padding as a 1 count, but it's way better in this list than the others because Magcargo can actually find it for the right turn. Sometimes it can be as good as using a Malolana on a certain turn. But a lot of the time I'm just playing one buff padding because the idea is you find it at any point and then that Snorlax basically doesn't die. He becomes the one tank. So I feel like playing more copies is kind of like a redundant kind of thing. Even more so in a Magcargo list where you just grab the padding at the right time. A couple boards to supply that Jirachi. We've got a couple of Marnie, 3 Malolana because I'm not playing any Hyperpots. You could think about playing Hyper Potion in here, but I don't have that high of a Welder count. And we are also triple acceleration, well, more triple acceleration based, so the Hyper Potions are less live. I'd much rather try and like smooth over 3CE to the top and then just Malolana and do the 3CE kind of stuff. Malolana is just, again, better when you play a Jirachi package as well, so just in general you get more Stellar Wish value for future turns. 3 Welders to work off of once we've exhausted our triple accelerations, and 4 Professor's Research because it's a big dump and draw to try and get us multiple Slugma and Orangaroos down on the board early, as well as just guaranteeing Snorlax and such. Like I said, I'm a big fan of Heat Factory. Even when you're only playing 7 Fire Energy, it's still live often enough to give us good draw power, and the halves give us even better access to those Fire Energies. And the final list I have is the Roxie build, actually. I think this is also an interesting one. I'm playing a thick Minccino once again. I really think Cinccino is a great option with Snorlax, especially when this list is very focused on triple acceleration energy. So digging through the deck with a combination of Roxie and Minccino hopefully sees you enough cards to access these triple accelerations. I remember Zoroark oftentimes had just regular Mallow available to it to guarantee double colorless energies at certain points after doing a bunch of trades, and sometimes you would whiff, but here we have all of our trades essentially, and then we have Roxie on top to see 6 more cards, and hopefully that's enough to get triple accelerations rolling. Having that Yveltal GX is a really important one-of, actually, because it essentially becomes, you know, a 5th triple acceleration energy in terms of being a way to close games and do potentially sometimes knockouts on even tag team Pokemon, so that's pretty cool. I've got a couple Zigzagoon in here just because it can be a math fixer when you've not been able to like maximize your Roxies, so it makes that Yveltal a little bit more live, and it's a bit more proactive as well, so sometimes you can just cheese that even if you've not used a Roxie on those opening turns. I've got a couple Lurball to work off the Wheezing, so it's more live, and just in general, it can get back like Cincinos and stuff if you just happen to get rid of them with Quick Balls or whatever early on, which can give you a bit more leeway with your discards. We got 2 Switch, 2 Great Catcher again, and then I'm playing 4 Great Ball. We have 25 Pokemon in here. I feel like Great Ball is better than Pokecom in this list exactly because you always want those Pokemon in your hand. You always want more Pokemon. You want Pokemon in the hand for discards off Roxie. You want them in play for Snorlax. So rather than comming stuff back in, I'm just going to have Great Balls and just say whatever I get, it can either be Roxied or it can be put into play for Snorlax. Everything's good. Basically, every target is good for us. So I think Great Ball is probably going to be sufficient here, especially when we have such a high Pokemon count in general. That makes a little bit more sense for me. Again, we got the trusty 1 buff padding, the 2 Escape Board to work off of Jirachi, a couple Marnie for hand disruption, a couple Malolanas for healing. Like I said, because we are Roxie based, we will be more aggressive with this Snorlax build than others, so I don't feel committing more down the Malolana route makes much sense. Then we have the 4 Roxie, and I'm playing 4 Cynthia rather than Professor's Research in this list, because we are so reliant on those triple accelerations and there's no backup really, that if you were to just have to research away 1 triple acceleration energy sometimes, that's already enough to put you in bad shape. So I'd rather just not risk that and guarantee protecting them with Cynthias and only discarding stuff that we want to discard with our Quick Balls and our Roxies. So yeah, those are the 3 builds I have of Snorlax right now. Let me know your favorite build of Maxlax. Was there another one out there that I didn't discuss? I know there were some ADP builds of Maxlax over in Japan, but why aren't you playing Zacian is my only argument. That's why I didn't discuss that today. Let me know what you thought about the 3 deck lists, and also Snorlax in general. Is it going to be a big flop, or is there enough there for him to be built around? Are there enough people like me crazy enough to try things like Intelleon in the list, where eventually one of us are going to strike gold and Snorlax is going to be a big contender? I think he does have that just raw hit points available to him that makes him super appealing. I can never ignore that card just because of that raw stat that it has. And Pokemon have been successful for far less. So yeah, let me know what you guys think overall. Hope you did enjoy this more discussion-based video because of the versatility of the card. I do like weaving these in now and then, and it felt more appropriate this time around, rather than going for just a regular deck analysis, because I'd end up having to talk about every other engine available anyway, without the visual aids. So I really hope this helped direct the discussion a little bit better. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.